This is going to be all about the where of industry, so trying to figure out if you're looking at an expansion for a facility, where you want to put it, and what the data is that you should use behind those decisions. So my name's Chris Urchel with Baker Tilly, obviously. I'm out of our Madison, Wisconsin office. I'm on our manufacturing and distribution team, serving manufacturing clients. My background is civil engineering, so I spent about 10 years or so as a civil engineering consultant before joining Baker Tilly, where I've been working to help manufacturing clients assess their business and specifically figure out as they make large investment decisions where they want to put it and how they want to go about having a successful project for an expansion or a new greenfield facility.
Great, thanks, Chris. Ryan Holseder, Managing Director with Baker Tilly, also part of our manufacturing and distribution leadership team. When we say manufacturing and distribution, anyone that grows, makes, and moves, so working broadly in that ecosystem. As you can imagine now, the dynamic environment is providing or facilitating a lot of dynamic conversations. So looking forward to speaking to all of you today on this topic, as it's incredibly relevant, and I think it's relevant for some very obvious reasons. There's a lot of headlines. These are the major players that are making investment decisions from coast to coast. As we all know, automotive and the related infrastructure is global. So what happens in one state actually does have a material impact in the general surrounding area and the supply chain networks that are specifically designed to support these new facilities. So a lot of consideration needs to go into what does that landscape look like before we ever even land on the ground. So these are all the things we've read about, right? These are the major names. But I think what's important here is when these companies make a decision, it has an impact, a downstream impact. The tier 1 suppliers, the tier 2 suppliers, the tier 3 suppliers all react to this, and they're going to likely need new facilities. And these numbers that are thrown out, $10 billion for a new facility, yes, that's material. But a tier 3 supplier who has to make a $5 or a $10 million decision, that's material as well. And you want to make sure there's a business case to doing so, and you want to make sure it works, provided the constraints that exist in the marketplace today. So before we kind of get into the details, a little bit about us and why we're talking about this, Baker Tilly, 9th largest professional services firm in the world, assurance, tax, and advisory. Global helps. We operate in 147 different territories, as I think we can all appreciate. Manufacturers operate in a global infrastructure and have to consider borderless considerations. So we're well versed to manage clients of all shapes and sizes in the global economy. So what is PDO? That is our project development office. Oh, dumped that there.
Red one, go back.
Yep, got it. Project Development Office, what is that? End-to-end capital support for large capital projects. And I mentioned large is a relative term. A $5 million investment is a lot these days. A 50, a 500, it's all relative to the organization, and you want to make sure you are being smart about the investment decisions that you make. So what does that mean? And I think what we want to get across in this presentation, when a lot of people think new investment, new site, expansion, nearshoring, reshoring, there's more to it than site selection. There's a business case that needs to be developed, and then the project needs to be executed upon and managed going forward. There's a lot of things that once the plant is up and running, there's a lot of things that need to be monitored from that point on, outside of just what's taking place inside the four walls of the operation. So those are the things we're going to highlight today. Chris, and we talk about big. Again, big is relative, large is relative, but there's always risks to these types of projects. So we do our best to work with our clients to mitigate those risks. So Chris, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah. So some reasons that we see these large capital projects fail for the project sponsor, we identify these as non-business as usual events. So they're highly disruptive to your executive management and your operations teams. Unclear project goals. A lot of times you'll end up with circular efforts, a lot of wasted time from your internal staff and maybe even spend on third parties. Misaligned project priorities, so not establishing what it is you want to build up front and who the parties are that need to be involved, so bringing in all the stakeholders early on. Communication's obviously a big one, especially when you get to the later stages and you've got all the different entities, municipalities, utilities, the engineers, the architects. You've got to have someone that's really coordinating all that and quarterbacking it for you. Lack of internal focus. So, this is kind of back to this non-business as usual event. You've assigned your internal staff to take on these projects. They have to keep the machine running, the day-to-day operations, and now they've got another task they've got to worry about. So trying to get some outside assistance with some teams that are familiar with these projects. These are usually things that as a company you're only looking at most maybe every 5 years, probably more likely every 10, 20 years for a huge, big investment. So have a process and approach behind it that makes sense and is efficient. And then the last one, lost credibility with investors. This is probably the most important of the group. You don't want to rush through the due diligence aspects that need to be completed, because when you get to the point where you're going to your board, your executive team asking for money, or you're going to a lender, it's going to become very obvious if you haven't completed your due diligence, and it's going to show up in the business case. Next slide.
Yeah. I think the due diligence is probably what stands out here in terms of demonstrating, hey, there's more things to think about versus just site selection. I think we all know in the world in which we operate now, labor is a major constraint. So if I'm going to build a new facility, can I even get the people in the area I want to be in, or do I have to consider other locations? That's one element, but the role we play is really concept to project launch. Why concept launch and feasibility are so important is, as Chris mentioned, there's risks to taking a step. There's risks to making an investment. There's a risk to disrupting the C-suite and the board. So what does that mean? The business case is, can we get labor in that location? Doing that business case analysis on the front end, looking at a project holistically versus just site, is advantageous because it's going to prevent you from, it's very expensive to hire lawyers, it's very expensive to hire engineers to start planning a project when in that location it may not work. We may not get the labor. So we take kind of that holistic analysis on the front end to say, yeah, we're in good shape, let's do this. Or maybe we needed to go 2 states over, one because of labor, new market tax credits, opportunity zones, things that enhance the business case for why a board or the C-suite are going to say yes to a decision. I mean, there's advantages to say, hey, I might be in a certain location if I can improve the business case by 20%. That's material. That's the analysis that needs to be done. So what we go is we go from concept to launch. And that's the role we play. And I think, again, I like to say it's different than site selection. It's more than just about the site. It's labor, it's business case, it's the financials. Are you going to put your plant in a place where you can get the products you need? We all know with supply chain disruption, the resulting nearshoring, reshoring, products are going to be made where they are consumed. So what does that look like from a local market standpoint?
So we're going to go through an illustrative example of a project we worked on here in Michigan, kind of at a higher level. But again, walking through these 5 different phases that we were involved with, we see these as consecutive, but they're oftentimes iterative. So sometimes we're doing a little bit of backtracking, especially in the beginning, to make sure that we're on the right path. The concept behind this project was there was a large oversupply of raw material in the area and a demand for the product that was exceeding production capacity. And so this was actually a JV between 3 different companies looking to alleviate that issue. It was a search not just in Michigan, but a multi-state search. And so we came in and helped them really define what it is they want to build. So how big are you going to build it, how fast, and then what's all the support infrastructure that's required before we get into testing feasibility. So in the feasibility stage, the key drivers in here were supply chain. Labor was probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest issues, and then they were big utility users from electric, gas, water, wastewater. So all aspects that we wanted to analyze upfront through the business case. Implementation, we stayed on once they had an internal go forward on the project to help them bring together a significant number of parties, and I'll go through who all in the state was involved in that process. But we were acting as the advisor to the project sponsor and really the facilitator for the project sponsor. And then project finance, our role in this effort was mostly around the credits and incentive side, but also providing some support for understanding what the debt and equity needs would be for a project of this size. So the result was this ended up being the largest manufacturing facility in the state of Michigan within this industry.
And one thing I would build on Chris's comments, not just for this project, but for any project, there's always a lot of stakeholders involved. And I think people will find, hey, I have a day job, I can't manage all of these things, right? So things fall between the cracks. So the role we play is not just as the advisor, but as effectively a project manager as well, working with the engineers, working with the local state and municipalities, working with the governing boards who are overseeing new market tax credits, opportunity zones, things of that nature. Really someone to kind of act as that day-to-day, not just air traffic controller, but the executioner of what's required. It was a collective of three different companies, Chris. But
yeah, so some of them did have production assets within the state. Some did not. One of them was international. The other two were domestic.
Yeah, but the facility is north of Grand Rapids.
So, starting off this project, the key here was really helping the client define what the project needs to be. So it seems obvious, right? But you'd be surprised how many times you start off and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what production levels are going to be. Does it tie to your long-range plan? So are you bringing in your sales teams up front to make sure that the sales and the production are tied together? Once you have that production level set, you understand what it is you're making, you've thought about your customer offtake pieces, so who it is you're going to contract with to purchase it and at what price. How are you going to obtain the raw material or the inputs for the project, and then who are the customers you're going to serve?
I would just add to concept too. You have almost take a step back and say there's what's going to go on inside the four walls of the operation, and what goes on outside the four walls of the operation. So that's your labor considerations for that coming into the four walls. Also the supply chain ecosystem. Are the materials, are the raw materials, are they even available in the network you need to get in a timely fashion to build your product that then can go to the relevant customers that you have? So very much the concept is, yeah, the building needs to look a certain way and produce a certain way, but factoring everything in relative geography, people, process, and technology. So
just to give a real basic example of some, what are we actually doing in this stage, right? We're thinking about not only all the different metrics that we're going to have to put together and document as a team, but what is the project going to look like in the initial years versus what we want to do 5-10 years down the road, so that when we start to think about where the project can go and what type of sites are going to be appropriate, we aren't stuck on a site that we have to go do the whole process again in 10 years because we didn't think ahead and we don't have a big enough site. And that could be physical space, or it could be utility service. So documenting, in this case, they were very large electrical users, very large natural gas, wastewater was a big issue. And then understanding from a production capacity standpoint, how big of a production space do you need? How are you going to stage it? So again, the earlier years can look much different than the later years. What's the exterior? So you're going to have office on the space. You need to accommodate that. If you have storage outside the facility, looking into those for spaces. If you have, you have to consider things like drainage on the site if that doesn't exist. But anyway, getting to the point where you have an idea of what's the total acreage that we need to be thinking about to meet our needs long term. You're also looking at transport. So do we need to have, is rail just a nice to have? Do we need to have rail? If we're going to have trucks, how many trucks per day are we looking at? We need to think about that from just ordinance level to make sure that there aren't any issues with getting the trucks onto the site. And then, of course, the labor side. So let's start defining, not only the total number of people we need, but what are the skill sets that are going to be required. Capital cost, and this is the big one. We've seen more often, we'd like to admit, where a company comes in, thinks the project's going to be a $30 million project. That's the expectation from the executive team. They let everyone go on their way, and a couple months down the road, they spent money and effort, and it comes back, it's a $100 million project. How did that happen? Because we didn't sit and define things up front and really evaluate the wants versus the needs.
One thing too, we found now, and this process is continuous, but in that feasibility and that concept, I think we're all kind of seeing what is ESG, what's ESG going to mean to different manufacturing organizations. What's been beneficial about feasibility and concept are the ability to start planning for some of those things now, whether it's board driven, whether it's internal audit committee driven, or even client upstream, downstream driven, saying, hey, we want you to be more transparent about the things you're doing. Being able to plan that out or account for in concept and feasibility has proven critical in making it more advantageous to the project as a whole, right?
So once you've defined the project, it's clear and it's accepted to the group as to what it is you're going to build. You have to think about moving into that next stage, the feasibility. So let's start to evaluate the business case and what's the data that's out there that we can use to start that evaluation. So these are tools that we've put together. This is some examples of the different types of software that we might use. There's a lot of different options out there. We use more than just what's here. The key here is that this process is something that we go through on a day-to-day basis. A project sponsor, you probably haven't set up the framework to do this. You're going to be a little more inefficient. So if you are doing it in-house, make sure you have a process or get some outside assistance. But things like Tableau, so visualizing and aggregating data, ArcGIS, using it for infrastructure data layers, and then ETL, or extract, transform, load platform. So taking those larger data sets that you want to use and then pushing them into the analytical tools. And I'll get into some examples of each of these.
And I would say, too, what's advantageous about the tools is they're readily available. The wheel doesn't need to be reinvented here. The data has been aggregated and can be used to an advantage in a project like this. So people kind of, take out the pencil and try to draw it from scratch. It doesn't have to be done anymore. A lot of things can be done to shorten the timeline because the data is material and readily available.
So supply chain network design. This is something that a lot of times in the manufacturing space really leads the way in terms of where the business says it wants to go. How much is it going to cost for you to get your raw material into this new location and then get your finished product out to your customers? And it's not only that, it's do you have an existing network of production capacity? So you have existing production assets that are perhaps scattered in different states or even within the same state or even internationally. Now you have the addition of a new production asset. What does that do for your need to rebalance all of the material that moves to those plants and then going on to your end customer? How are they now served in this new environment with a new production asset? So there's some pretty detailed analysis that can go on in this process. Another key point as you're testing feasibility, as we all know, inflation has been historically kind of in that 1% to 3%. Unfortunately, in the last year, I think as of March of this year, it was up around 8.5% from the previous March. It's become a real issue that management teams have to evaluate. And so we've developed this costing inflation management platform. And essentially what it allows the project sponsor to do is bring in their bill of materials, understand, even connect to their ERP system, and understand what's going to happen in the future in different scenarios where inflation is going up or going down. And then, the choice there is, can we pass that on to our end customer? If we can't, then, what does that do to the business case? That's something that we have to evaluate before we make a decision to move forward with this project.
I'd say to build on inflation and the inflation management piece, there's an inflation as it relates to the business case. I think it's happening. It's an unfortunate reality. It's hitting manufacturers, not just in their material costs, but if you're going to build a new facility, it's obviously impacting what goes into construction real estate. But it goes back to that feasibility concept of enhancing the business case as best as possible. Yes, inflation is happening. What are the other levers I need to look for? New market tax credits, opportunity zones. It goes back to the labor analysis. The labor analysis could tell us that maybe 50 miles away, you pay $2 less an hour for that employee. You pay less for that employee group that's there, right? So everything helps right now, and that's why it's all about kind of understanding the business case and that feasibility and concept phase, taking into consideration what's going on in the world of inflation.
So outside of supply chain, inflation, labor, probably the biggest, if not equal to supply chain. really understanding what it's going to cost for you to operate in these different locations and using the data to make those informed decisions. So we've got an analytic platform we put together. This is a tool that we were hoping to kind of demo live. It's in Tableau. We're bringing in Bureau of Labor Statistics data, as well as data from a third-party labor data aggregator to help understand what is the total cost of labor specific to this project. So using the project's buildup of those required participants that you're going to have. So if you have, in this case, we're showing 75 different employees, maybe 50 of them are operations, 10 admin, you've got a quality control piece, but really understanding that total cost of labor in these different locations. So in the upper left, the patchwork there, those are each different metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs, and each one has its own data set that shows you what it costs for these different specific positions, and then aggregating it and weighting it to the project. So you know, is it going to be $1.5 million in this city versus $2 million in this city? And this can be done obviously at a national level or a more regional level like we're showing here. Another tool that I had mentioned previously is around ArcGIS. So bringing in the infrastructure data layers. So this is as much about figuring out where the project can't go as where it can go. So in this instance, as I mentioned, the utilities were a key aspect of this. So mapping out where are all the transmission lines for gas and electric within the state. Where are all the wastewater treatment facilities that are in the state, so that we can start to think about how close do we need to be to someone who can serve us from a wastewater perspective. You might have something like the purple patchwork here, where you've got an executive team that has to fly in from another location. It could be domestic, international, and they don't want to have to take anything more than a direct flight and a 90-minute drive. Well, let's do some drive time analysis from these airports to figure out where it is that realistically we can put this facility. And the key being meshing this all together so that we start to narrow down geographies as to where the business says this wants to go. So this is not about, at this point, finding a specific site. We're not wasting our time driving around, looking at sites that a realtor is showing us and hoping that it's going to work, and then finding out later, because we didn't do something like this, it doesn't make sense. This is about narrowing the geographies so that we can really target where we want to start to look for sites.
And I think, as we know with manufacturers, water, people, and electricity are typically the biggest line items for day-to-day operations. So trying to address those proactively on the front end to get to the where, the how, and the why.
So once you've made it through the feasibility stage, in the background you've got your business model going on. You're really looking for this internal go-forward decision, because now we're going to spend real dollars on engineers who are going to come in and easily hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in engineering. The key being, we did all the due diligence up front. We think, regardless of where the project is geographically, it makes good business sense. When we start to think about the different prices from different geographies, it also can make sense. These are the areas we're going to target. Let's go out, and in this case, we needed to find a 100-acre plus site. Well, how do we do that? These aren't listed sites that are just out there. We need to start talking to at the local level to those who know about where this type of business can fit, once we've decided generally what cities or regions we want to be in. So at this point, we're bringing in a lot of different parties. In this case, we worked with Consumers Energy and DTE because we had sites in both their service territories. From a state agency perspective, you're starting to talk early to them about permitting, if that's an issue, because that obviously can be a long lead time concern. So bringing in MDARD and EGLE from an environmental standpoint. The municipality, so we're talking not only to the city administrator or city manager, but their wastewater department, their water department, their public works director, who knows about the roads and the infrastructure that are getting to the sites or where the sites might be we want to start to target. And then probably most importantly, the economic development organization. So we worked very closely with Michigan Economic Development Corp, or MEDC. We also worked with several of the local EDOs, depending on what site we were looking at. But these are the groups that are going to help us, because they're incentivized by bringing business to their area, and they understand where these businesses can and should go. So that's the top line. I mean, that's a lot of parties right there. Someone has to manage all of that. That's something that we were able to sit as a project advisor and help the project sponsor. A lot of times, part of the issue is confidentiality. You don't want to disclose to your competitors or to the public that you're going to build a huge new facility. So in this instance, we were acting as the veil so that they could maintain confidentiality. Then below all this, you have all the technical aspects, right? So now you're bringing in a contractor. You need to understand, how close are we on our expected budget? They're going to do constructability reviews of the sites that you're looking at. They're working with the engineers. Those engineers probably have sub-engineers. They're working with the equipment vendors, so you can get realistic budgets on equipment. Supply chain issues are huge right now, so your long lead time equipment, is it 18 months out? When do we have to put a down payment down of 30% so that we can meet our timeline for the project? These are all things that you have to start earlier so that you don't run into budget and timeline problems too far down the road.
And I would add to that, in terms of kind of building the business case and looking around the corner for those elements, we worked with a large manufacturer who, because we had the conversations early, we facilitated introductions to the municipality. And they said, hey, because of the wastewater element, our local, we can't handle it, we just can't. So that was accounted for in the business plan of the new manufacturing facility. Yes, it raised the cost, but the balance there was they wanted access to a labor pool, which was at one, readily available, and two, at a material price point that still made the business case work. So again, you're going to be presented with things that might be perceived to be roadblocks, but if done early and perhaps in that proactive, collaborative manner, works out at the end of the day, versus, again, engaging the engineers, getting further down the road with lawyers, only to find out that, wow, the wastewater facility is not going to work. Looks like we need to write another check that's material for the board and management.
Yeah, and to that wastewater piece, we've seen plenty of instances where if you aren't talking up front with the POTW that's going to be providing that service and understanding if they have to make an expansion, how is that going to get paid for? Do you want to actually have wastewater, bigger pretreatment on your site, or even full treatment? And what's that going to cost specific to that site? Those were, in this case, very impactful.
And again, touches on the recent, or not recent because it's been done for years, but I would say more focus on environmental and sustainability, right? The ESG reporting that's going to be, that has been done and will continue to be a major topic.
So I've hit on some of these already, but this is really more what we'd call the micro siting stage. In the macro siting, we were narrowing down geographies based on the business case and the large data sets we were using. Now we're doing extreme due diligence on several sites. And ideally, we're not more than 5 sites. So 3 to 5 different sites that we're considering. We're starting to look heavier into the environmental aspects of that site. Access to the site, community support, or they're going to run into roadblocks because the community just doesn't want our business we're in this area. Labor force availability. So we ran the numbers on the labor, but how are we going to physically go out and hire these people? Who can we work with to support us in the hiring process? What are the incentives that might be out there from the state or the local level to support the project from a labor perspective? Are there educational institutions that we can partner with to build programs to train our employees long term? We're talking with the utilities on the rate analysis. So what is the specific utility rates that we're going to get? Are there infrastructure upgrades that are going to require customer contribution aspects? So things that aren't covered in the rate that we're going to have to pay for, a new substation. Do we own it? Does the utility own it? What makes more sense? Of course, the land cost. At this point, maybe you want to put down an option on the land to purchase it as you complete your due diligence because you're afraid someone else might come in and swoop it up while you're doing the due diligence, but you aren't ready to commit to the site in full yet. Interfacing with the locals, I think kind of already went through this, but at this point we're starting to ask about what are the credits and incentives that are out there. So from a federal standpoint, but now more at the local and the state level. Those tend to be really the more lucrative pieces that can come into these projects. And they're not entitlement. In other words, they're negotiated. You're applying and you're competing against other projects. So you have to have a strategy in place that makes sense to maximize the benefits that you're going to get. So where does this all kind of wrap up in this instance? I guess from an analytical perspective, what we would recommend doing in our process is from a quantitative side, let's take all that information we've collected on these sites, the supply chain, the labor, the utilities, the utility costs, not just from an operating side, but the capital cost side, roadway infrastructure upgrades. We don't want any surprise $1 million roadway improvement plans that our new facility is going to create because of all the new truck traffic. If that is there, what's included in this analysis, the cost of the property itself, the potential for the incentives. Let's add all that up in a 10-year net present value and do a comparative analysis so that when we have to go in front of our executive team, we can say, okay, this is the process we went through, this is quantitative, these are our best guess numbers, this is our reason for starting to narrow down the sites, and this is our preferred site. Now all that's meanwhile feeding into your business model in the background, and you have site-specific inputs to a business model that's going to translate to a financial model. And the importance of that is, there's a good chance, depending on the size of the project, you're going out to a lender and you're asking for funding. At that point, they want to see the due diligence. Where's the business model? What's the EBITDA for this project? Here's the financial hurdle that you have to cover. So in this case, in the bottom right, we're showing an example of a sensitivity analysis. So solving for debt service coverage ratio. So that's what the bank might require a 1.25 debt service coverage. Well, show me that the project is going to meet those needs. And here's some sensitivity analysis. If we're wrong on this capital cost by a little bit here, or our revenue on our product in this direction, this is what happens to the debt service coverage. So it kind of leads into the project finance. So, project finance, you've been dealing with it all along throughout the process, but now it's time to approach these parties, whether it's the lender, and understand what their terms are, what are the covenant issues with your current lender if you're going to them for additional capacity. We're starting to look at actually applying for the grants, starting to negotiate the incentives that are out there. In this instance, there was about $15 to $20 million that they achieved from incentives. A lot of it came through tax abatement programs. There's TIF programs that are out there. We had grants through MDARD. There was a lot of incentives that came to this project, but if there wasn't someone in the background managing that, understanding what the options are, they're not just going to necessarily get handed to you, or if they do, make sure you're maximizing your potential there, because there's a lot out there, and again, they're not entitlement, it's things you're competing for.
And I'd say too, an important point on the credits and incentives, there's a lot of misconceptions around what they are or what they are not. Are they restrictive? Are they non-restrictive? That's part of the collaboration process with the entities who distribute those. We've been operating in this space, I think, in new markets for 35 years as a firm. So very tuned to tell the client what it is and isn't, because as we talked about, given the pressures of any project right now, these are things where you can enhance the project by 10, 20%. Incredibly material, and it's worth asking versus not asking, versus assuming, oh, those are restrictive, I don't want to do them because in 10, 20 years, something. That's not the case, and I think everyone wants to see projects get done these days, so you're going to get people sitting at the table who are going to put their best foot forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's programs out there that if you're not aware of, can be extremely beneficial. So there's one from USDA out there now, the Supply Chain Loan Guarantee Program. This is basically a loan guarantee, typically a lower interest rate, up to $40 million. It has to be administered through lenders who are qualified by USDA, but if your lender doesn't know about it, there's no way that you probably would either. So we're helping clients through that feasibility and application process and working with their lenders to help them attain things like this. So industry use cases, I mean, there's really no limit on where this process works. It's all industries. I think we would say that where labor, supply chain, utilities, where the analytical pieces are there and they're meaningful to your project, that's where the data side of it's most valuable. But this is a process, whether it's a third party like us helping you through or you're doing it yourself, you have to manage it and have an approach and accountability. But it works in all industries, light and heavy industrial, food and beverage, where you have very high volume movements of materials and low margins, very impactful there. On the healthcare side, it might tend to be more around the labor, not as much maybe supply chain costs, but supply chain security, the regulatory aspects. So there's really no limit in terms of what industry it works best for, but I guess being a lot in the upper Midwest, it's a lot of heavier industry, light industry, and food and beverage.
And I think this goes to obviously, we're the world in which we live in here, a lot of the EV transformation, new investment for these facilities. But this is also these are the categories of the industries that are most impacted and taking action upon nearshoring and reshoring. These are the industries that are now starting to come back, and they're saying, if I come back, where should I go? For all the reasons that we've been talking about.
So I think we're kind of wrapping up here.
Yeah, we're wrapping up and we'll do a Q&A, but I think, we'll take a project with our client from start to finish. What I do want to call out, because I think it's in proper due diligence, there's instances where you get in concept and feasibility and you say stop. It's not going to work. Let's pause for various reasons. Maybe construction materials are just too high and it makes sense to look at this a year down the road, or the supply chain network isn't set up correctly in a local market where you have to pause and look at a new market 6-7 months later. But in the instance that projects go from start to finish, when the lights get turned on and the facility starts running, more projects come out of that. If you go in the new markets realm, there's different reporting requirements around compliance that are necessary. We play a role in that. Continuous interfacing with local municipalities. And also, if you're in a new facility in a new state, you are now under new tax requirements. So what does that mean? And also, if you're a manufacturer, you're likely distributing. What are the implications of the states you're distributing and the products you're distributing? So constant kind of monitoring and reporting and setting up data and analytics for the client so they can continue to do this in a productive manner, so that really no stone is left unturned, or kind of around the moniker of looking around the corner and planning accordingly. So I think that's it for today. Yeah, it's easy fire. Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, real quick, I know it's not a typical project, but if you had an estimate, right, this is kind of started, how long does it take?
Yeah, I'll let Chris kind of answer that. What I would say is, right now it's all about mitigating risk. People realize they have to make an investment, and no investment is small. I don't care if it's 10 million, 100 million, or $1 billion. The mitigate risk part says, let's have the conversation early and go through concept and feasibility. And that could take a couple weeks, a couple of months. Now, project feasibility to execution, that's a different story. But I think the moniker now is risk mitigation. Yes, I need to do this, but what's the most economical way to do so that benefits not just my organization, but the clients I'm going to be serving by opening a new manufacturing enterprise? Chris, you can probably speak more to the day-to-day realities.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a huge range. We're working with a client in the past that just recently, we went through a process. They thought they wanted a greenfield. They ended up finding out that it's going to cost a lot more than they were able to afford. But luckily, we figured that out early on. They were able to pivot and move to an acquisition strategy. So, that's one scenario that it's different. But I would say, from end to end, from concept all the way through construction and commissioning, you're easily anywhere between, probably at the shorter end, 18 months to get to that commissioning stage. At the longer end, maybe up to 3 years. But it depends on the size of the facility and the industry, and the construction time frame. So taking out the construction piece just to get to the point where construction start, it's probably more in that 12 month to 18 months. Getting the lending process, so having the funds available, that's part of it as well. It's hard to say, but.
Yeah, and it's, obvious, but it's driven by market forces as well. We all seen, at the beginning we talked about the amount of EV investment going on, and that seems to be accelerating some people's decisions in terms of, hey, an OEM's going to a specific territory, and I think we all know the model of a lot of the suppliers are going to have to come in and around that general periphery. Well, how do I do that? This is a territory I haven't operated in before. How do I start checking off all these boxes? Or perhaps, going to the well to say, yeah, I got to go to this place, but how do I make it the best deal possible for my business?
The project I was suggesting, expansion is an option. Do you treat expansion as another new site, or is that a separate effort?
I'd say it's kind of the same process. So, one of the clients we've worked with in the last couple of years, they had one production facility. It was up in the Northeast. They were expanding like crazy in terms of their customer base throughout the country. I think their preference was, let's start by looking at, does it make sense for us to just expand in the Northeast where we have our existing assets, our labor pool, our comfort zone? And we said, well, let's look at the supply chain. So we ran the supply chain analysis, and it pointed to kind of what we had all thought is, you have a lot of customers that are starting to move to the West Coast, that are on the West side. When we run the supply chain and the cost differential, between operating, they ended up somewhere in Texas versus up in Pennsylvania, it just made total sense. Like, yeah, you need to, your new production capacity from a business case standpoint, looking at supply chain, labor, it's telling you, you need to be in the West, closer where your customers are, and that made sense. So we would never say, it has to be a new greenfield. For sure, we'd look at expansion, but a lot of times it's the impetus for the project is we kind of know we want to be somewhere else because we're expanding geographically.
Yeah, I think too, expansion checks all the boxes from the standpoint of you might have a 200,000 square foot manufacturing footprint today, and you say, yeah, I need to expand, add 75,000, let's say. You'll still need to check the boxes because you're likely going to a bank for lending, so you'll need to back into all those things that we talked about, right? It may seem simpler because it's right next door, but there's still the permitting. I'd say in most cases you're going to want to try to go that new market tax credit opportunity zone route, enhance the business case, right? But it has the same, you have to follow a lot of the same processes, even though it might be right next door or just blowing out one wall and adding on. I wouldn't discount that as ever being an easy task. You'd want to take the same approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same approach, and it can be easier, but can also be more difficult trying to pigeon or squeeze in a lot of additional production capacity on a site that might just not make sense for what you're trying to do.
So it seems to me that the Baker Tilly is almost perfectly poised for this opportunity with the supply chain disruption. Have you seen a spike in business with reshoring?
It's a lot. Yes, it's a lot of conversations. Because I think there's the reality that we need to do something, but there isn't an obvious answer. So really it gets to kind of road mapping for your business, right? Do you want to stay in your same relative territory? Again, it goes back to products are going to be made where they are consumed. So where are your customers? Do you need to be closer to the customer? Because guess what? Fuel is insane right now, right? I could be 500 miles away, but there might not be a business case to be able to ship them the product that I want to sell. So it's very much to kind of sit down and pencil it out right now, because I don't think people want to jump to a conclusion. They know a change needs to be made. Absolutely. So there's more thoughts right now. A lot of companies more thought around vertical integration, right? Going more upstream, more downstream to control their destiny a little bit more. A lot of emphasis on acquisition. Hey, it takes a lot of time to build. Maybe I need to go and acquire. That's very popular right now. So it's different for each business, but there's definitely thoughts around, I think, again, an obvious observation, kind of operate in the present but plan for the future, and planning looks a lot different to a lot of different entities.